Here's the gist of The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Released in September 2019, the newest-ish entry in the famed Zelda franchise is a Nintendo Switch exclusive remake of the classic Game Boy game of the same name. Actually, more accurately, it's a remake of Link's Awakening, sourcing more heavily from the DX release on the Game Boy Color. Seeing as we now have 3 games called Link's Awakening, I'll hereby be referring to the Switch release as Link's Awakening HD, as that's the most apt description I could possibly attribute to it. The graphical upgrade in LAHD is dreamlike compared to DX's mere introduction of the concept of color. The beautiful, bright colors and stylized texturing is simultaneously stunning and superbly itself. Link's Awakening HD's art style stands out as a sort of claymation-esque take on the sprites of yesteryear. While this aesthetic may not do it for everyone, to me, it perfectly encapsulates the marvelous yet mysterious feelings exuding from this title's dialogue and setting. Quick sidebar, it's worth noting I didn't exactly grow up with Link's Awakening, though Zelda was an overall massive and formative franchise of my childhood. Rather, I played through the entirety of DX a few months ago to have a frame of reference for how this remake will hold up to the original. I'll try to keep my synopsis of the scenario brief, as many of you are likely already has a handle on the plot from playing the now 26-year-old original. You play as Link, a green-clad adventurer who finds himself caught in a horrid storm at sea. After washing up on the coast of the strange Koholint Island, he's informed monsters have taken over the land. In order to escape the land itself, he must wake an entity called the Windfish, who sleeps in an egg atop a mountain. This stands as the core of the entirety of the experience, wandering from place to place to gather weapons, tools, and most importantly, the 8 instruments of the Sirens, which when played together will stir the Windfish awake. These instruments are locked away in 8 dungeons full of puzzles and monsters standing in your way, with bosses both big and small guarding unlockable items and treasures lying in wait. Combat typically consists of swinging your sword at enemies and holding up your shield when they swing back. While most enemies die in a handful of strikes, fewer so when using charged up spin attacks for double damage, Link on the other hand has a set amount of hearts serving as a life meter. The game starts you at 3 hearts, but more total life can be acquired by completing dungeons and finding pieces of heart throughout the land. A staple of Zelda games are bosses with one distinct weakness, typically exploited by making use of whichever new item was acquired nearby. However, this extends to common enemies as well, with certain foes only being weak to a select few weapons in your arsenal. This type of combat really drives home the puzzle action adventure RPG subgenre that makes Zelda games so enjoyable to me. And new to Link's Awakening HD are common enemies who must be stunned by blocking their attacks with your shield, leaving them open to strike back yourself. This alone makes combat against common mooks in the overworld much more engaging in this remaster when compared to the old school method of mashing the A button. Mercifully, unlike the original, both the sword and shield have dedicated buttons, leaving your 2 item slots free for utilities such as bombs or the shovel. Not only that, but other items such as the power bracelet now grant you their abilities passively, and the Pegasus boots finds itself on its own dedicated button, allowing you to dash around the map as you please once found. Changes like this, which take advantage of modern controllers and technology, greatly smooth out the experience overall. Not having to open the menu every 5 seconds to swap from my sword to Rock's Feather saves me time needed to, write this review in a timely manner. Speaking of, I don't think I have to explain too much about the gameplay, do I? What with exploring the overworld, finding secret heart pieces and seashells to grow more powerful, using items found in dungeons to clear the path to new areas, all the standard Zelda fare. I'm sure you can probably pick up on how things go from here if you're even adjacently aware of Zelda games. Particularly if you've played the original, or DX, as the layout of the land remains near entirely unchanged. While the camera is no longer locked to a per-screen basis in the overworld as was the case in the Game Boy game, the environments are still tile-based as per your typical bird's-eye view Zelda title. This has led a lot of people, myself included, to realize how small Koholint Island truly is. But this is not inherently a bad thing, as the world is jam-packed full of secrets and collectibles. Not to mention, the lack of screen boundaries helps curb the ease of getting lost in this world, which for me at least is where a lot of the difficulty was found in the original, figuring out where to go. Hints are often often cryptic, and I certainly had to look up a walkthrough once or twice simply to find my next dungeon or town I was tasked with visiting. Thankfully, getting around has been made easier too, with the original game's warp point system being expanded upon to a full, proper fast travel mechanic. As for Link himself, his movement is, interestingly enough, locked into 8 discrete directions, although you don't stop tile to tile as you might expect. At first, walking felt a bit strange due to the snapping in different cardinal directions, but I quickly grew used to it. What I did not grow used to, however, was the frame rate. While typically attaining a smooth 60, the game would occasionally jarringly drop to 30 FPS, most notably when loading new areas such as entering or exiting buildings. I've seen reports that if you downloaded the game digitally, having it installed directly on the system rather than an SD card can curb some of these issues. And while this did speed up load times for me, the performance improvements were negligible in my testing. And besides, this does not excuse the core problem in the first place. I'm hoping Nintendo pushes out a patch to partially, if not entirely, address these issues in the near future, as it very much does affect my overall opinion on the title, doubly so if you're someone who mainly uses their Switch undocked. If such a patch has been released, I'll be sure to make a note of it in the description below. Even when sluggish, however, Link's Awakening HD's game feel is on point. Attacks and enemies have good responsiveness, visual cues and sound effects make clear what is and isn't working to progress or beat bosses, the newly remixed music is simply outstanding, although suffers from the same issue the original had of being overwritten by the Piece of Power and Guardian Acorn tracks. Seriously, even if you don't intend to buy this re-release, the soundtrack is worth a listen of its own right. And the characters, while still a bit two-dimensional even in 3D, all maintain their same quirky if a bit stilted dialogue straight from the original. This is a bookshelf. It certainly is, Link. What? You can see that? Okay. Okay, the writing is just as charming as the original, never mind. With the new art style, music, and wider field of view, it surprises me to say how I'm more drawn to seeing how little has changed, despite how different everything may seem. You'd expect the stiff translations to be smoothed out, but they're maintained. You may have expected the boomerang rewarded for the long and arduous trading quest to have its own item slot rather than overwrite your own, but that's not the case. You'd expect the bow and arrow to not cost you house and home, but it looks like the world of crime has been kept tempting in this remake. Getting back on track here, while the gameplay remains largely unchanged overall, some small additions attempt to further justify the game's $60 price point, and further smooth gameplay. The seashell sensor, for instance, gives players hints to locations of the game's many collectible seashells used for unlocking upgrades. Empty bottles for capturing fairies have been introduced among other healing items to give players more options for gaining life aside from fairy fountains. Although strangely breaking tradition, bottled fairies will not automatically heal you if you die. Regardless, this helps overall reduce the often inconsistent and borderline unfair difficulty of the original, much to my delight. Some new collectibles were added around the world, such as extra heart pieces and collectible figurines, both of which can be earned in the new and revamped trendy game. Oh, there's some get up and go to it. I think I might have missed it. Yep. Damn. I shall not be bested by trendy game. I think I got that right. Oh, that's dead on. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. There you go. Buster. What? What? I shall not be bested by trendy game. It just won't happen. Okay, that's much better. That's a much cleaner grab. Don't you dare. Don't you dare. There we go, that's a much cleaner grab. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, these are small changes, additions, or improvements. One of the biggest selling points of Link's Awakening on Switch was the new Dungeon Creator, replacing the camera mouse who would snapshot your adventures for the shockingly now defunct Game Boy printer. Dampé the Gravekeeper happens to have a magical slab that turns models of dungeons into real explorable ones. This is used as a means of adding a new sort of Zelda Maker-esque feature, allowing the player to create their own 10 dungeons to conquer. However, it's nowhere near as robust as Mario Maker, limiting you to only using preset rooms lifted from dungeons you've already cleared. You can't even choose what spawns in chests or what doors are locked. It simply contextually generates keys in chests according to how many locked doors lie ahead, with the nightmare key to the boss room always being contained in the last chest. While I enjoyed this sort of mini side quest Dampé has to offer, giving you challenges and templates to create your own dungeons with a few preset rules, it's by no means anything grander than a tech demo. Perhaps Nintendo is testing the waters for a proper Zelda Maker where you make your own overworlds and dungeons from scratch, but this feature as it is but a mere gimmick. Still, the ROM hacking, level editing child in me can't help but smile at puzzling together little dungeonettes to share with my friends. An underrated selling point and a short detour I'd like to take are changes to the world that grant players ease of access. This seems to have been a point of some consideration from the level designers when approaching this re-release. Otherwise archaic puzzles have been given more visual cues to make it clear to the player how to progress without just flat out explaining it to them, and most notably, the color dungeon seems to have been aesthetically overhauled with colorblindness in mind, giving each of the colors and puzzles distinct shapes or visual differences beyond that of hue to give more people a chance to partake. Accessibility in games is always a welcome addition, and features like this should be commonplace. On that note, a few features seem to be confusingly missing from this version of Link's Awakening. The touchscreen doesn't work in menus in handheld mode, buttons cannot be rebound, and the D-pad simply does nothing. It's not bound to walking, let alone anything other than scrolling menus. Strange, given that movement is very much not analog in this game. Still, all of the improvements, additions, and smoothing out of quirks brought on by limitations of the Game Boy make Link's Awakening HD, in my eyes, the definitive way to play the game. Does that mean I recommend it? Well, it's hard to say, all things considered. While combat is excellent, the puzzles timeless, and the art style and music create a bright and beautiful retelling of a classic game, Link's Awakening is exactly that, a retelling. A fresh coat of paint on a classic that's readily available at used game stores or on the 3DS for cheap. And given HD's performance problems, the lukewarm edition of dungeon rearrangement, and a whopping $60 price points, it's unfortunately hard for me to recommend anyone, aside from die-hard Zelda fans with disposable income, rush out and buy this title. If this was a standalone game, as in not a remake, then it would be a no-brainer to recommend, but given that both the original and DX continue to exist, well, you could just play those if you're really dying to experience Link's Awakening again. Sure, it's not as new and exciting, and the inventory management is a pain, but the game still holds up, and it doesn't have the problematic frame drops or cost investment of Link's Awakening HD. Assuming the performance is hotfixed with time, and you can get the game at least $20 cheaper, absolutely go for it. Whether you're re-experiencing a childhood memory or discovering the mystery of Koholint Island for the first time, at $40 or less, it's a worthwhile proposal. Otherwise, in my opinion, you're better off sleeping on Link's Awakening. Thanks for watching, and take it easy.